Welcome to Methods 2, Week 11. We are going to start in on Illustrator and Photoshop this week. So, to get started in Illustrator, we're going to start with a really basic structural element, a little pyramid, and we're going to look at how we can take this drawing, turn it into a line drawing, and open it up in Illustrator to control the line weights. So the idea here is that instead of doing the line weights in Rhino, we're going to show you a different technique. It's an alternative technique. It's not better or worse than Rhino, but it's a technique to use Adobe Illustrator to do your line weights. And then we're going to combine it with your Photoshop file to create a rendered drawing with nice line weights. So we're going to start with a stack of blocks. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a Make2D of this, and we're going to bring that into Illustrator. But the first thing we need to do is we need to save this view so that we can continue to use it. We're going to mash this view repeatedly throughout this project. So you need to pick the view that you want. So I'm going to pick a little sort of axonometric like that. And I'm going to go into my Rhino file here, and I'm going to go to Set View. And then I'm going to go down to the very bottom, and I'm going to go to Named Views. And this is how I'm going to give this view a name so I can go back to it multiple times. So I'm going to make that named view. This window opens up, and I just want to hit the Save As, so in the top left. And I just want to call it Perspective 1. And see, that's going to save this exact view in the file. So now if we go away from this view and we zoom out, we can always go back to it by going to the Set View. Now we see it here under Named Views, Perspective 1. Okay? So once we have this set perspective view, what we want to do, the first thing we want to do is we want to create a Make2D of this object. So this is no different than what we were doing before. So I'm just going to select the full object. I'm going to type Make2D. And we just want to check that everything is set up the way we want it. So our view is set. We've turned off our hidden lines. Make sure you also turn off the group output. So you want all your lines just to be as individual as they can. And then we just, if everything looks good, we hit OK. And it'll make 2D for us, and then we go to the top view, and that's where we should see our drawing. Okay, so that is our Make2D. So this is all a series of curves. Okay, so once we have this, all we're going to do is we're going to take our Make2D, we're going to select it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to export just this line drawing to an Illustrator file. So you can do all of this inside Rhino. So go to File, and then go to Export Selected. And then here you want to export selected. I'm just going to put it, in this case, on my desktop. I'm going to call it Illustrator, but first I want to find the Illustrator file in my options. So right here, Adobe Illustrator. It's a .ai file. I'm going to click on that, and then I'll call it Illustrator 1. Okay, and just hit save. So remember where you've saved that. And then you can just leave the settings the way we have it and hit OK. And then now you have exported that file. Then we're going to go into Illustrator to open that file. Okay, now that we have our Illustrator file made from Rhino, what we're going to do is we're going to open Illustrator. So you should have your Illustrator opened. It will welcome you. See, welcome me. And what we want to do is we want to open the file we just created. Right? So I'm just going to go to File, Open, and then find the file I just created. So I called mine Illustrator 1. It's right there. Just going to hit Open. And there we go. I've got a file with my little stack of pyramid boxes in a pyramid. So now that that is open, what we want to do, the first thing is we want to resize it so it's actually working on the sheet. So let's just look at what we can do here. if we select it. So I just ran left click, drew a box around it, and I'll create a box there. And I just want to increase the size of it. Now see how if I just increase the size without holding shift, it starts to distort it. You want to make sure you keep it nice and clean. Keep those proportions correct. And I'm just going to resize it so it generally fits the sheet. The size is not important here because we're going to resize it when we get into Photoshop. And when we're working with Illustrator, Illustrator works as vectors. So vectors are just single lines. So now that we're in Illustrator, let's look at what Illustrator is. So let's get this zoomed in so we can see it on our screen. So if you go to View, we can go to Fit Artboard in the window, and that'll open that view up for you. So Illustrator looks similar to InDesign that we used last week, but what Illustrator is a vector drawing program. And we draw with typically the pen tools. So we've got a couple selection tools over here. We've got a pen tool over here. And then we have some of these lines and fills like we saw in InDesign over here that we'll use. And then we have colors and properties over on this side that should come up when you open the file. So let's just take a look at what our drawing consists of that we just brought in. So I'm just going to use this arrow here, and I'm going to click, and you can see as I click around, I'm going to move this thing out of the way. I'm going to hide it. That's the new AI stuff. So you can see each of these lines is a different, what they call path. So you can see that path comes in. And if I click in on the line itself, you can see that everything else goes gray around it. So I can start editing that individual line, and if I don't want to do that, I can click out or hit escape and get out of that space. But basically, all of these lines came in the same line weight. So let's look at how we can change the line weights of this drawing. Now, when I work in a project like this, the first thing I want to do is I want to take all the lines, and then I want to go over here to my command bar, and I'm going to go to the stroke command. And what I want to do is I want to make them all the thinnest line. That's the way I like to work. I like to work the thinnest line up to the heaviest line. So I'm going to select them all, and you can see over here, this should look familiar from last time. We've got the different weights, and here I'm going to change them all to 0.25. See how that made everything thinner? Then what you can do is you can go in and you can start to select certain lines that you want to be heavier, and you can make those heavier. So say I want the perimeter here to be heavier because we always like a nice heavy perimeter. So then I can grab one of those lines and maybe make it 2 point. What that did. And I can keep doing that. I can grab one line at a time and change it to a singular heavy weight. I could also, if I hold my shift down, I can select multiple lines and click my way around the edges. And then let's stop there and see what happens. We can change all of those. Look at that. So I'm going to work my way around the perimeter, select all those lines, and make them all 2 point. So the nice thing about Illustrator is you get the clear visual feedback immediately of what your lines look like. Okay? So this little stack of cubes is really nice to look and study different line weights. So we're going to look in at how we can create these and on different line weights and make this really read three-dimensionally. Okay, so now in thinking about how to put line weights on this, I'm going to bring up a file that you will recognize from earlier in the semester where we looked at line weights. And we're going to look at the line weights we have. So line weights in 3D. We've got the silhouette line, which is the perimeter line. That's always the heaviest line. And then we have the interior line. So that's a line that's folded and pointed towards you. So edges, you can see here, all these edges. And then we have interior lines, which are the folds away from you. Those are the lightest lines. So I just want to keep all of those in mind as we go in and we create the line weights over here for this box. So we've got interior lines here, and then we have interior angle lines here, right? So this is an edge that's pointing out towards you, and this is what maybe is a crease that's pointing away from you. So these are going to be heavier, and these are going to be your lightest lines right now. So let's go in and select a couple of these. So I've selected those 3. So we had 2 as our heaviest out here. These are 0.5, so let's go somewhere in between, and let's make these 1. See how they look? That looks pretty good. Let's kind of keep doing that with these silhouette edges. And if we don't like how they look, we can always come back and change them. Okay, so all these edges are 1s, and all these shallow interior lines are 0.25. These are feeling a little light. Let's see what happens if we make these a little bit darker. Let's just test 1, make it a 0.5. That looks a little better. Go through and do all of these. Just select all of these interior lines. Okay, so now we have, if we zoom out a little bit, a nice pyramid with some good line weights. Okay, so there's 3 line weights in this, and it's reading really great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, save as, Illustrator 1, and I'm just going to call it lines only. Okay, so other things to do in Illustrator, you may find that you get your model and it comes in and you've got a line that's extended past, and you want to move that line back over. So sometimes the files that come in from Rhino are not totally clean. Sometimes you have to adjust some things. So let's look at how we can adjust. So we've been moving things with this empty arrow. The closed arrow is called the direct selection. And what that can do is it'll allow you to actually pick points on the lines. So let's see what happens when we use that here. So see, when we use that arrow, these anchor points come up on either end of the line. So the anchor point, if you're in the filled in arrow, you can select those anchor points and move that line around. So you can use it here to move it and reconnect it. You could also move that point here. And they should snap to the other lines that are in the file. The other thing you can do with the anchor points is you can actually add more points to it. So the pen tool, which is right here, there's an option here to add an anchor point. So let's see what happens when we do that. So we can add a point there, and now we've got an extra point on this line. All of a sudden this line can bend. Okay? So that gives us some movement in the line. The other thing we could do is we could add another anchor point. And then once we select that anchor point, we can actually use the scissors up here to split that line. And what that has done is it has actually split that line into 2 pieces. So it actually took a pair of scissors at that point and split that line. So those are things you might need to be able to edit your lines. A couple other fun tricks with Illustrator. If we add a point here, we can do our direct selection, access that point, and then go over to here and use this little pointy anchor point. And we can add, it'll start to actually curve this line. Look at that. So you start to curve the line if you add the anchor point. So that's this little triangle. You can also draw your own lines. If you just take the pen tool, you can draw your own line just by left clicking, and then right click and you're done. And then again, you could use that anchor point, grab that corner, and turn it into a curve. In Illustrator, if you close the lines, just draw a closed line. So I'm just going to draw a line here that's closed. Now I can actually fill that with a color. So I just double clicked on that line. So remember we used this line tool last time. We can change the outline. We can make that even bigger. We can change the interior to different tones. And then what's nice about Illustrator is if you go to edit it, those colors come with you. The other thing we can do in Illustrator is we can use layers, which we'll also use in Photoshop. So you can create a layer. If you go over to here, we've got our paint, color, gradients. If you go all the way down to what looks like a stack of papers, that's your layers. So right now, just like we've been doing in Photoshop, you've got layers, you can turn it on and off. Or sorry, like we've been doing in Rhino, you can turn them on and off. You can lock them, which can be very handy in Illustrator. You can name them, so we can just call this lines if we wanted to. And you can make new layers. So let's make new layers where we can use them to start to fill some of these boxes. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to rename it Fill. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag it underneath the line layer. So the lines sit on top of the drawing and the fill sits underneath. I'm going to lock my line drawing, so basically I won't touch it or mess it up. And I'm going to go to my fill layer, and that's what I'm going to start drawing with. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my pen tool, and I'm going to use that to draw lines. But first I want to check my fill situation. So right now I've set this up so I've got no outline, and then I've got gray here. So if I want to come in and change this to a different color, I could do a dark gray. So I just double click on the color. If I wanted to set a line, I could. If there was a color here, say there's already a color, if I want to get rid of that color, I just hit that box with the line in it. It makes the color go away. So anything I draw here is going to fill it as a gray. So let's just see what that looks like on its own. So I can just kind of keep drawing. See, if I hold my mouse down, it'll start to make those curves. Otherwise, it'll just add new anchor points until I'm done. When I'm done, I just drag my mouse away, and that is all filled. If I wanted to add an outline to that, I could. And I can change that outline just like I did on all the other things. Okay. So that's how you draw with the fill. So now what I want to do is I want to fill these boxes to give it a little bit more three-dimensionality. So what I want is I want to fill with no outline, and then I'm going to use my pen, and I'm just going to click around the corners. And you can see that it's going to snap to each of these corners. And that is nicely filled in. Looks like I kind of missed this corner, so I can always go into that object, click on it, grab that anchor point, and pull it up to the right corner. This one looks a little funky too. I actually should fix that line. I can go back to my layer, unlock my line, grab that line instead, slide it up. Oh, there's an extra point there. I can get rid of that point. Okay, Now I've just made a bunch of changes. There we go. Grab the right point, drag it up, and now we've got that filled. So let's fit the artboard in the window so you can see what we did. So that is on that fill layer, and you can see it. I can turn that fill on and off. Okay. I'll actually delete this stuff over here. All right, so I'm just going to lock that again and go back to being on my fill layer, and I'm going to do that a couple more times to fill a couple more of these boxes. I'm going to do, and again, if anything doesn't come out quite right, you don't have to undo it. Just go down, move that point over, and fix it. All right, I'm going to do one more. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do some more, but so I'm going to click away. So I deselect that. Then I'm going to make a lighter gray here. And we'll make a couple more of these. And I'll do it a couple more times. Okay. And now you have an even better pyramid where you have some three-dimensionality to it. All right, and I'm going to save this as Illustrator color, so I don't write over my lines only. And then there's a couple other things that are kind of fun in Illustrator that you can do. If you have some objects selected, so I've selected my gray object here, I can go up to Select, and I can do Select Same, and I can choose it by a number of different things. I can choose by fill color, stroke weight. So let's do fill color and see what happens. So now it's selected all three of these objects that have the same fill color, which then means I can go in and I can change the fill color on all of them at once. So let's say I want to change this to all blues, right? So I can select an object, select same. In this case, we'll do fill color again. We can change that to, let's do another blue. We'll just make it lighter. So I have select my blues. I can also do select the same line weight. So if I select a path, I actually have to unlock my lines to select a path. If I select a path and I do select same stroke weight, it'll select all of my lines that are 1. And what I can actually do is go in and make them all fatter. Right? So if I change my mind and I don't like how it's reading, I can come in, select same stroke weight, and I can make all of those heavier. So once you set your line weights, you can still go in and easily adjust all of them at once. The other thing I could do is I could decide I want this whole drawing to be done in blue, so I could select same stroke color. Now it selects everything that's black. I can go in here and say I want to change that to some dark blue. I can change that. And now my whole drawing is with blue lines, right? So that is a great, great tool. So that's select, same. So I think that is a good place to stop on Illustrator. There's tons of stuff you can do, but this is a good place to stop. And then we'll move back to Photoshop. Okay, so before we go into Photoshop, we need to do the next step of the assignment. So the next step of the assignment is to take the view of your object and run it through Enscape in the white modeling mode. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go back to Rhino and we want to go to the same view that we used before. So let's go to Set View Perspective. So that view is going to come up, and then what we want to do is we want to open up our Enscape. So I'm just going to run Enscape, get that opening up. All right, so now we have our object in Enscape, and what we want to do is we want to model this in the black and white settings. So I'm going to go to my settings, and for this assignment, we want to set your mode to white. You're going to turn your outlines all the way off, so you should just have object white outlines, and then I'm also going to take it and let's turn our saturation all the way down to 0. So we have a really nice all white and gray object. Okay. Once we have that, what we want to do is let's set our sun so that it's doing something nice for us. And right now we don't have a ground plane, so I'm actually going to go back into Rhino and I'm just going to draw a ground plane on this object. And I'm going to stretch it a little bit. And we do this so that, oops, not that. Stretch it like that. And I'm just going to do that so that we have something to cast shadows on and to give us a little bit of depth. So now that we have that, let's go back to Enscape. That looks much better. And then what I want you to do is adjust the shadows so that they're doing something interesting. So again, click on the screen, use your U and your I. Give yourself a nice casted shadow. I think that looks pretty good. So we've got colors, white, exposure, everything's looking great. Now we have to do one very important step, which is to make sure that the angle in Rhino is matching the angle in Enscape. And the way to do that is to use this button here, which is the Synchronize Enscape's camera position with Rhino. And I'll show you why that's important in a minute, but let's do that. So you click on that, and here is my Enscape synchronized. That looks great. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to save out a screenshot. So before we do that, we want to make sure our output settings are good. So let's go to our visual settings. And in this case, I have my output at 760 by 4320, so that's pretty high. I have my rendering quality at ultra. It probably could be fine at high, but these two settings work pretty well. And then we also want to make sure that we are exporting with our output. We have this box checked. So we want to export all of these extra files, and I'll show you what we're going to do with those in a minute. And then once we have that working, let's just hit the screenshot view. We don't have to create a view or anything for this assignment, just do the screenshot here. Because we're syncing our views, that's what we need. And we'll render out our Enscape. And then that's what we're going to use in Photoshop. So let's give it a minute. Okay, so once we have this exported, we will have a number of files. So if we go to where those files are created, I put mine on my desktop. You can see them here. There's 5 different files, okay? And then we are going to open those up in Photoshop. And I'm going to show you 2 different ways to open those. So let's go into Photoshop. And in Photoshop, we can go to File and Open. And we could open any of the files there. So we could just hit that and hit Open. We can also just go to Open and we could select all of these files. If we use Shift, we could select them and it'll open multiple images at once. So you can get all of these files open in Photoshop, but they're all in separate files, which is good and bad. And I'm going to show you a trick that will open them all at once. So I'm actually going to close these. And this works if you're bringing something out of a renderer where you know they have all of the exact same size and they're going to line up exactly on each other. You can use this tool. So if you go to File and then you go to Scripts, which is down at the bottom, and then you go to Load Files into Stack. And what the stack is going to do is just like we've used layers in Illustrator, it's going to put all of these images into one file on top of each other. So I'll show you what happens. So let's load files into the stack. And then it's going to ask you what files, so then you have to browse and find them. So we got to find them on our desktop. And then you can just select all of them. So hold Shift and select them all and hit Open. And then hit OK. And what it's going to do is it's going to open all of these layers one by one. And instead of opening them in separate files, it's going to put them, you can see it here, it's going to put them all into one file, each on their own layer. So when you do that, everything opens together. So now what we want to do is we want to save that file. We'll go to Save As. And you want to save that file into your OneDrive. In my case, I'm going to put it on my desktop. And I'm going to do Photoshop 1. And it's going to save as a PSD file. So a PSD file is a Photoshop file, and that it will retain all of the qualities of your project for Photoshop. So it'll save all those layers. So you want to save that document, and that's the document you work in. So let's look at how these layers work. So right now, I've got a stack of layers over here, and I can turn them on and off, and you can see as I do that, they line up on top of each other. Now you may not use all of these layers, but since they're all made through Enscape, we're going to bring them all in. Okay? So all of those are there. If I wanted to, one thing I can do with these files is I can change their opacity. So if I take this file, I can actually make it get lighter. And you can start to see then the layers underneath it. So now we're seeing the black of the file below through it. Right? So then just a couple other things to understand about this file in terms of terminology. So this is your rendered file right here. This is what's called your alpha mask or your alpha file. And what this is it's just the sky. So if I look here, this white part, it renders out just the sky. So anytime a rendering sees the sky, it's going to render that out. And that'll be useful for windows and things like that. There's a file called a depth file. We're not really using that for this kind of render, but you might use it for something more sophisticated. There's a material ID where it identifies different types of materials. And in this case, we built everything as one material, so there's no ID. And then there's object ID. So it renders it out with each of those cubes reading as different objects. And the reason why we use these IDs is so that we can more carefully select each of these objects when we're using Photoshop. You'll see this when we do the second half of the assignment when you're collaging into Photoshop. But let's just turn all of these back on. So now this is the file that we're working with right now. So now the last step of this assignment is to bring your Illustrator line weight drawing and put it on top of your rendered drawing. So we're making these combo files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go into Photoshop and I'm going to open that Illustrator file. Now I didn't open it in a stack with everything else. I'm going to open my lines only file because it's not actually, it's at the same proportion, but it's not exactly the same size and drawing setup as the rendered file. So it wouldn't have stacked logically together. So now I have my Illustrator file, and what you see here, because this file came out of Illustrator, is that it's actually a vector file. And it's a vector file in the sense that the outlines are the only lines in the file, and everything else is transparent. So this checkerboard black and white or gray and white that you're seeing is actually transparency. So all that's in this drawing are these lines. So if I move this drawing around, I can just use this arrow over here. I can move these drawings around, and it is just the lines. So what I want to do is I want to cut and paste this drawing and put it into the other drawing. So I'm just going to do a command like you have done before in Rhino. So I'm going to take this selection box up here. So it's called the marquee in Photoshop. And I'm going to drag this box around my whole drawing. So that is basically selecting that whole drawing. And then I'm just going to do a copy paste. So Control C, or up here I can do copy, Control C. So it's copying that, and then I go back to the other Photoshop file, and then I'm just going to hit Control V or paste. And then you can see that that line drawing came in, but it came in at a completely different scale. So now what we want to do is we need to change the size of that line drawing. So we can use what's called transform, and that can be Control T, or you can go down to edit, transform, and you can just hit scale. So I could do scale, or I could do Control T, and then you can see this box comes up. And if I use my scroll to zoom out, I can select this box. And in Photoshop, you actually don't have to hold Shift down. You can see if you grab any corner, it's going to start moving that box proportionally. So you can zoom out, get it to fit on the sheet, and then zoom back in. And now what you have to do, this is a little bit tedious, is you're going to come in and you're going to match your line work to your drawing. So it's a little bit of back and forth. Adjust, move, adjust, move. So I can say I'm not quite right because I've got some extra space there. I need to make it a little bit smaller. And if you're doing minor adjustments, you can use the keyboard, but that is looking pretty good to me. If I zoom in, all my lines are on even edges. When I'm done, I will just hit enter or double click. And now my line weights are on those boxes, perfectly lined up, looking great. Okay, so for this part of the assignment, the last step is to save your Photoshop file as a JPEG file and put it into your InDesign document that you used last week. So what we're going to do here is we are going to save this first as the Photoshop file. So just hit save, and that'll save the file with all of your layers. And you want that because you're going to use this again for the second half of the assignment. Then what you're going to do, ignore that pop-up, you're going to go into File and do Save a Copy. And what that's going to allow you to do is save a different type of file. Here, if you click underneath, we want to save it as a JPEG. So it'll save it as a copy as a JPEG. And a JPEG is going to flatten, we call it flattening, flatten all of those layers into one file. So we'll call that Photoshop 1 JPEG. And then that JPEG, you'll get this box will come up when you go to save. I always set everything at maximum quality 12, large file, hit OK. And that'll save that as a JPEG. And then let's see what we get on our desktop. Go through all of our programs. Like I have every program on my computer open. I even have the calculator open. So if we go to our desktop, we go here and we preview that image. This is our JPEG file, and that is what you're going to put into your InDesign document. Okay, so the last step will be to place that JPEG into the InDesign file that you've been using. So you should have an InDesign file going that has 5 pages in it. You've got, or sorry, 6 pages. You've got your first assignment with your 3 rule sets, your second assignment with your 3 renderings, and then you want to make a duplication of that sheet. And you're going to have, this will be your methods. You'll change your header, methods 5, assignment 5, part 1, due April 10th. And you're going to come in here and you're going to delete whatever image you had in here, and you're going to place the image that you just created from the desktop, your Photoshop JPEG file that shows me that you have created a Photoshop image with the line work that we were looking for. And you're going to set that up so it looks good with all the other work that you've done. Because again, remember, you're going to be turning in this whole set of drawings as one final project for your final. Okay, so you'll do one perspective section and one elevation. And that is the end of that assignment. So also just keep in mind, if your lines look shaky in here, because it's an image file, you can always go to display performance, high quality display, and everything will res up and it'll all look great. Okay. So that is everything that you need to know to do your assignment. We'll wrap this up by just taking a quick look at the views that you're going to be choosing of your solar shade. We did this tutorial in a very simple structure because it was easiest to describe, but you're going to be doing all of this work on your solar shade. So let's look at what you're doing for your solar shade. Okay, so jumping back into solar shades, for your assignment, you are going to be doing a solar shade in 2 views. You're going to do an elevation view and a section perspective. So everything that we just did with the blocks applies. I just wanted to remind everyone how to do a section perspective and then show you how the Make2D will work. Let me get rid of these layers. So you will have your solar shade, and when you want to do a section perspective, you need to again make a clipping plane just like we did in the previous assignment. So make a clipping plane, make 3 lines, and then rotate it 90 degrees so that it is facing the right direction, and then slide it until you get a clipping plane that you like. And then in Rhino, set yourself up for a view that you like. So a section perspective, you'll be looking at the section end, and then you'll have a perspective view of your object. So you might want to do a little bit of adjusting of the clipping plane and the view. So I like this one. I've got the ends of my object coming through that clipping plane, and that will look great. And then I want to save that view. So set the view. Call it final section perspective. And then go through all the steps of matching that to your Enscape file like we just did. And then your Make2D, you can do the same thing we've done before. Select what you're looking at, Make2D, view, turn off your hidden lines, turn off your grouping, hit OK. And then you'll see here, you'll have a nice line drawing. And then that drawing, that Make2D drawing, you can go to Export Selected, save it as an Illustrator file, Adobe Illustrator, solar shade Illustrator, save those settings. So we're doing the exact same thing we did before. Going to Illustrator, and then when we open that file, it'll come in. It's going to be a little more complicated, obviously, than the squares, but same rules follow. Take that object, stretch it, keep it proportionate by holding Shift. And then that maybe is going to come in a number of different colors. So the first thing you can do is go in, change all the colors to black, change all the line weights to 0.25, and then you can start zooming in and doing some line weight work. Now see what has happened here, and the reason why I wanted to show you this is sometimes we get some funky things happening with the very fine detail. So what you want to do is you want to look back at your Rhino and see what's happening. So here we've got an object cutting through another object. So we're not seeing these lines as they cut through. So we just need to patch those up in Rhino, or if there's a lot that aren't working, you can always redo your Make2D. But if I want to just fix this in Illustrator, I can pull, remember I want to change the path. I can bring that line up. I can bring that line over. I can bring that line down. If I see that's happening all the way down the drawing, let's zoom out a little bit. Looks like I actually want to take this line and extend it all the way to here. And then I scroll down. I can fix the same thing here. I can click on that, grab the control, pull the line all the way up. And then here I need to fix these. Extend that one to here. Sometimes you have to click out of the files or out of the paths. There we go. Extend that one over. And look what we've got. That looks so much better. Then you just have to make some judgments on what is going to be your best, your heaviest lines and your lightest lines. So the end of all these little sticks are being cut through. So those are going to be heavier, but not the whole stick. See how that took the whole stick? So you want to zoom in. Select these lines. And then make some judgment calls. If that's too heavy, maybe 0.75 works at that scale. The artboard and window. And then look at some of these major lines. So again, you want that silhouette and you want the ground lines. So let's pick some of those silhouette lines. You can do this in small pieces. So this is where my solar screen is cut through. So we'll change all of those to 2 as a start. Now see, that looks bad, but all we have to do is zoom in, select that line, bring it over, bring it over. Now that looks better. And then sometimes there's extra lines, like there's some extra lines from where the slab was here. And then we have lines that kind of need to continue, so we can extend those. Look how much better that looks already. Let's just grab a couple of these ground lines. And then this is where we would come in. We talked about the scissors and making extra points. So I like this line for the ground plane, but I want it to stop at my structure so that I can make this building read as a building. So I want these lines to all be part of my building. I want this line to stop here and here, right? And now this line's cutting through and I don't like that. So this is where I would come in, select that, and okay. And then to split a line into two pieces, what you can do is you can go to the line you want to split, this line. If you hover over it where path comes up and then you double click on it, see how it'll gray everything out around you. And then what you want to do is you want to put 2 points into the line. We'll do one out here. We'll do one on, we're going to make sure we're on the path. There we go. Make sure you're on that path where the path comes up. And then I'm going to select those. I'm going to click on this one and then use the scissors. And then I'm going to click on this one and use the scissors. And then what I should be able to do is click the solid line and then pull that line away, delete it, go here, go back to the other arrow, pull that line back to where it should be. And when I'm done, I can just hit escape. Everyone comes back. And then I could do a little bit of fixing of these lines where I just want them to continue. You see how when you have intersect and line extension on, line extension is just extending it at the same angle it was going at. So once you have those on, you can come in, you can delete some of these lines, which don't actually refer to anything right now, and then you have your perspective, okay? And then you'll do the exact same thing for your elevation. So your perspective, you would come in, and then you'd start to create that silhouette line that we talked about, fill in these blocks, and then you should have a nice drawing.